You're going to be playing a game here on Earth in one way or another. And so the one choice you have is to choose the game that is most meaningful to you. And so you can play the game of your culture or of your society or the game of material success. But at some point, I think all of the games will let you down except for one particular game.
There's an interesting story by Hazrat Inayat Kahn, who was a Sufi master, and he compared the ego to a magic shrub. And he said, like, the ego in the beginning, it's like a very thorny bush. It's ugly. There's no flowers there. There's hardly any leaves, and just a bunch of thorns. But then when we start to grow spiritually, we start to develop ourselves, we chop down that bush. But being a magic bush,
if the government comes to you and says, okay, we want you to pay your taxes, and you're like, well, I don't actually exist. I'm actually continuous with all other consciousness out there in the universe. I mean, the government's probably not at the point where they can recognize the truth of what you're saying.
Welcome to Ancient Wisdom Thoughts. This episode is going to be about ego. Bajan, how are you?
We could say that this episode is brought to you by the ego.
It's brought to you by the ego. That's very accurately said. And, looking at you, you're there in the summer in Christchurch. I'm in winter in Amsterdam. I just want to warn our listeners for the coloring difference on your screen. I look like a complete zombie next to you. And so it's very good. It's very good for my ego, to get scale back a little bit.
Yeah, some people might be suspicious that I'm running a whole bunch of filters on my end, but I'm not. This is the world as it is.
This is the natural New Zealand summer that we're seeing on your face.
Yeah.
Okay, so ego, that is a really vast subject. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I think there's a few points we need to cover. We need to understand what is the ego. So that would be a good place to start. And then I think once we understand what the ego is, like trying to get to the bottom of why the ego exists and the role that it's playing. And then maybe we could start to think about perhaps why it's causing the problems that it does cause.
Yes. And also I want to talk about strategies to overcome or transform the ego. I've thought about that a little bit as well. So yeah, so if I may, what is the ego? I would say in one phrase, the ego is the sense of self. And so in that sense, I think ego will always be there. Like there will always be a sense of self, but it's just like, what is that self? How do you define the self? And most of the time when we speak about the ego, it's the limited self. It's the self that is, bound by the body, the mind, the senses, the three-dimensional world that we think we're living in. And as we know from last week's episode about Maya, the three-dimensional world we think we live in is just the illusion of the real world. But ego keeps us kind of tied down into that three-dimensional world. And our teacher Sri Chinmoy often said that the very nature of ego is separativity and limitation. So I think those two words really define the ego. What would you say?
Yeah, so I'm pleased you touched on limitation, because I think that is a really key point to understand, that we've talked previously about the nature of the human experience and the nature of the experience of the material world being the experience of limitation. So if we presuppose that we are some much vaster consciousness, and the experience we're having here is the experience of limitation. We're taking that boundless, vast consciousness, and we're coming into this experience where we're bounded in so many different ways, whether it's physically, whether it's mentally, whether it's our ability to feel and experience. In every direction, we're dealing with limitations. And so if I think about the universe and I think about the world as we experience it, so the first thing that I'd really notice is that we're experiencing limitation. And this limitation leads to ignorance. Because we're limited, we can't see, know, feel, understand everything properly or as it truly is, because we're limited. And then these two factors, the limitations and ignorance, that to me, they're like the mother and father of the ego. And so if your mother and father limitations and ignorance, you can only imagine what sort of wild child you're going to have born from that union. And
well said.
So I think that is the ego, and the thing that I think about the ego is that it is the experience of the self from the position, or like seen through the filter of Maya and illusion.
Yeah.
And so all of those things all have a key role to play. So we have limitation, we have ignorance, and we have Maya or illusion that we talked about last week. And as we said, Maya is one of the fundamental qualities of the universe. And the reason for that is you need to believe that what is going on here is really something. And so if you're here and immediately you start looking around and say, hey, hang on, none of this is real. Look, I can see Lord Shiva over there pretending to be this guy, and I can see Vishnu's there pretending to be this guy, but I don't buy this whole thing. So if you get that right at the start, like, then the game can't go on. Like, you can't
Yeah.
really have a meaningful, enjoyable cosmic drama if immediately you see it's all of your friends just dressed up in pantomime. That's going to take away from the
Hey, by the way,
enjoyment.
is there some kind of crystal in front of your screen? Because there's all these rainbows flashing over your face and head. There's,
Oh, I do. There's a crystal hanging in my window. Should I? Is it getting in the way?
I mean, it's very psychedelic. I mean, I don't mind it that much. It's
Yeah,
just that people know it's not a filter. It's just your crystal being the wild
yeah.
ego trials. It's
There's a
doing its
few
wild.
just random rays of light just hitting the crystal, and every now and then they're moving around.
All right, all good.
So I can remove it if it's a problem.
No, it's okay. Let's
Okay.
go on.
So what were we saying? We were talking
Yeah, we
about.
talk about if you don't, you have
Oh
to
yeah,
believe that the game is real. You know,
yeah.
you can't say like, oh, that's Lord Shiva over there, that's Vishnu over there,
Yeah.
etc.
So there has to be this sense of this is reality, and that is the illusion. That is the quality of Maya, that we believe that the experiences we're having here are completely real. This is the entire reality that there is. And what that does, though, is that stops us seeing everything that's beyond that reality. And perhaps what's beyond that limited sense of self and the experiences that we're having is the true transcendent reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the big mystery and the big paradox of life, that in fact we are the infinite, but we are bound into the finite. And I know Sri Aurobindo said that the ignorance is actually God's greatest miracle, not the light and the wisdom, but the fact that God can cloak himself and make himself a limited being. That is the real miracle of God, in a sense. And yeah, I like that idea of that we need ego in order to participate in the cosmic game. So it's an absolutely necessary tool. It's not something that is negative or bad, or and I don't want to put any of those labels on the ego. But on the other hand, it is something that ultimately limits us, and the game is for us to discover or rediscover that reality, who we truly are, that we are indeed the infinite, eternal, and immortal divine. And for that, we need to transform the ego. We need to make it into a divine ego that has transcended that sense of limitation. So, if you talk about a sense of self, you can also identify with the divine part of yourself. But I think that cannot be a mental theory or state. It has to be a lived experience. Like, you can't just say, okay, I'm the Brahman. From now on, I'm going to behave like I am the Brahman because that's what the spiritual masters told me. I believe that is true. And so from now on, I'll just be the Brahman and I'll, not react to anything. And of course, that is just setting you up for disaster because that's not a lived experience. But in order for you to really identify with the larger self, with your larger divine ego, you do need to practice and go through all the stages of the journey, the spiritual journey, in order to reach the ultimate goal of transforming the ego. And
Yeah,
that's the game we're playing, right?
that is the real game. That is the greatest game in town. And so, and that's what you want to think as well. You're going to be playing a game here on Earth in one way or another. And so the one choice you have is to choose the game, and to choose the game that is most meaningful to you. And so you can play the game of your culture or of your society, or the game of material success. You can play the game of fame. You can play the game of power and dominance. So there's almost an infinite variety of ways you could approach the game of life, depending on what you think is valuable and what your goals are. But at some point, I think all of the games will let you down, except for one particular game. And that's really the game we're talking about, which is the game of waking up. It's the game of remembering who you truly are. And that seems to be, in the spiritual sense, that seems to be the fundamental game that this universe has been created for. It's the game, because it's really, I think we've talked about this before, but it's like the idea that for a young child, the first game they start playing is hide and seek. Like, it's like
Mm,
peekaboo. It's like, now you see me, now you don't. And
yeah.
there's something wonderful about that as an analogy, that is, the child's first game, but perhaps that is the real game as well, that the
Yeah.
supreme or the divine is constantly hiding from us, and we're constantly searching and trying to find our true nature again and wake up to that.
And I think when we become spiritual and we start to have glimpses of this higher reality, that's when we start to suffer from ego. Like before in the ordinary life, you could say, then, we don't really notice, I guess, or not so painfully aware of our ego. It's just who we are, we identify with it. But I think when we start getting glimpses and inklings and yearnings of this higher reality, then ego really becomes a burden. And I remember that from, starting my own spiritual journey, that I really was suffering from, gosh, this limited self and this kind of darkness that you feel you're in. And you feel that behind the door of ego, there is this divine realm where you're longing to go to. And sometimes if you have a spiritual experience, you're actually there for a few moments. And many seekers who've gone through these experiences, they've always trying to recreate the experience again because it's so fulfilling and it's so thrilling. And so in that sense, that's when ego starts to become a burden, I guess, when you become spiritually conscious. And that's when you want to start and transcend it, right?
Yeah, so why don't we go back to the very start of our lives here on Earth, and try and like map out how the ego is born and how it's formed, and how it comes into being, and the role that it's trying to play in life. And so we've talked a little bit about previously about that there's two types of experiences people have that are transcendent beyond this life. So there's near-death experiences, so experiences people have of the afterlife, we could say, or the transitional period between this consciousness being in this form and our consciousness being in some other form. But there's also another type of experience called PBEs, which is pre-birth experiences. And so there's a well-known American gentleman who's talked quite deeply about his pre-birth experiences. But one of the most interesting things for me was he was explaining like the experience of being this vast, infinite consciousness, and then coming down to earth, like coming into the physical body. And whether it's exactly true or not, that's almost beside the point. But it's just his experience that he has had is a great way to sort of just try and imagine what that would be like. And so he talks about that there's this process of veiling oneself. So like going by that, what we mean is separating ourselves from our larger self. So like being able to come into the physical form, in some way you have to veil the fullness of yourself so you can actually like fit yourself into this form. And so he says that there was a space that you go into, and there's these beings that are helping you. And basically it's like a big pit of like black tar. And like when your soul, or when the higher part of your being is about to come into earth, that is where you go into. So you enter into, in the very beginning, when you're about to come down to earth, the whole experience starts with you stepping into this like pit of like black tar. And that, as you enter into that, you can kind of imagine that your consciousness is going from this very broad, vast transcendent consciousness, and then suddenly it's captured by the materialness and the darkness and the separativity. And that is what they say. They say that only the brave souls will dare to come to earth, because the experience is so shocking and so jarring, that when you are this vast, infinite, connected, um, um, integral consciousness, and then to come here and separate yourself, like to lose that connection back to the divine, to lose that sense of vastness and expansiveness, and instead feel your consciousness come down into this very dense, heavy material form is an incredibly jarring experience, I'm sure. And so that's what he talks about, that when you come into this veiling process, you almost start to panic. And he talks about that at one point he did come down to an incarnation, but he absolutely panicked when he was inside the mother's womb, and he panicked in such a way that he actually caused a miscarriage, and so he was never born in that life. And that caused him all sorts of karmic responsibilities. So he actually talks about how he actually had to train and prepare himself to actually try again to come back down to earth. And he would practice going into this, like, this black gloop tar, and being veiled and separate from his true self, and just being able to be there and relax. And for me, it really kind of did strike home, like, that there is the journey to come to earth is no joke. Like, the whole experience of coming into, like, consciousness and being coming into this physical form is an incredibly shocking and jarring experience. And so you can understand why a baby, when they're born, there is this look of complete shock. And like, the first thing you do is cry, because it's like, oh my
Yeah.
god, like, where am I, like, what have I become? And
Yeah.
so if that's really the foundational experience coming in, you're going to be just grasping for anything that you can cling on to. And so, and the way we bring children into the world, and the way we bring them up, we don't ever exactly explain what's going on here, because most of us don't really know what's going on. So we kind of put them in this position that, okay, like, you're not quite enough yet. So, like, first of all, we've got to educate you, and that's going to take a really long time. And so right from the beginning, you kind of feel like you're not quite fully a human yet. You're still like, one day, it's like one day you'll get there, but you're still not quite fully here yet. You're not fully enough. And so there's this long period for human beings, which is very different from almost all other animals, because nearly all other animals, within a very short space of time, they're able to act out their full natural behaviors.
But that's a little bit crazy, because animals are also souls that have veiled themselves, in a sense.
Yeah.
So why is it different for them?
So, well, I think in some ways they're more consciously, well, let's say they're more naturally connected with their morphogenic field, with the field of energy around them, because they're operating in that field of connection and responsiveness to the environment around them. Whereas, because we're so much in our own heads, we're not really feeling the energy fields around us. We're not feeling and connecting to all of the knowledge of all of the other human beings. We're dealing with our own limited amount of things we know. Like, so we come here and, we can't speak, we can't understand what people are saying. It's like you're going to feel in that moment like a total stranger in a strange land. Like, everyone's kind of babbling around you. There's all this noise. And there's all this colors, and it would seem extremely chaotic.
And
Um,
does a newly born baby, does he remember anything from his pre-birth life at that point? Did he say something about that?
he didn't say anything about that, but I think that's what the veiling process has done. Is the veiling process is connected with the process of Maya as well. It's like it's all to make you
It's all,
really believe that this is all that's going on. Like, this is all you
it's
know.
also it's also a process of forgetting, because you're forgetting
Exactly.
your whole life that you had in the higher worlds in heaven.
Yeah, and that's what people, when they say, well, if reincarnation is real, why don't I remember anything? And it's like, if you did remember everything, it would spoil the game. If, like, you were here and you were like, oh, that's right, I used to live in this country and I've got these friends and I need to go see this guy and do that. And, oh yeah, I still, I like, 18th century, Baroque music. It would take away from the uniqueness of the experience of being you right here, right now, being
Yeah.
born in Holland and living in the 21st century, and all of the uniqueness that you have the potentiality to experience now. It would almost be spoiled by having too many memories. If you could remember, your set life in the 1900s and the 1800s and the 1500s and the 1200s, like, what
I
are you
mean,
supposed?
many people would love that. It's like thrilling. But at the same time, there's one person who does remember that. That's the realized soul. So once
Yeah.
we achieve real enlightenment and God realization, then that's the moment when you can remember all your previous incarnations, because you have the wisdom to deal with them And just know that they're part of your lifelong story throughout all the incarnations. And
Yeah.
you're not in any way discouraged by them or upset by those past lives, but they, you know the role they played in your ultimate journey towards enlightenment.
Yeah, because if you look at it too closely, like if I could see that, 2 lifetimes ago, I caused someone to be killed, for example.
Yeah.
And then if I had to carry that round in this life and I was feeling the whole time in some way guilty and remorseful and oh my God, how can I think that I can become a really good person? Like look what the harm I've caused in the past. That's really not going to be of any value to me now. And so and there's this really great idea that they have in the idea of true justice is each of us is responsible solely for our own actions.
Mm.
And so obviously karmically, we're also responsible for the things we've done in the past, and we're going to get the results of that. But if we can try in this period of time to really try and feel as though what we're responsible for this time is my choices I'm making in this lifetime. And that in some ways is how it's set up, that we don't remember all the things we've done. We don't remember all the choices and the mistakes we've made, because I think that would hinder us being able to really fully go into this life.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned that the guy who had these pre-birth experiences said that some people were a little bit loose in their suit, right? Then they could sometimes have glimpses of these previous lifetimes or other occult things.
Yeah, so I really like that idea, because you see on Earth at any one particular time, there's a huge range in the people's ability to experience the subtle and the esoteric and the more hidden realities. So you have some people here who are constantly talking about how they're seeing leprechauns and they're seeing, all these different sorts of beings, and they're interacting with them, and they're feeling, seeing everyone's auras, and they're experiencing colors and lights and all of these things. And then on the other extreme, you've got people who are like so deeply enmeshed in the material body that they don't feel anything beyond that. They don't even believe that there could possibly be something beyond that. And so we could say that is all related to how tightly you veil, like how tight that veil is put on to you. So some people's veil is a little bit looser than others, I think. And so they're getting more of that non-visible, the more subtle information. But I always think as well, that's not always a good thing. And you see that with some people who did have real visionary capacities. They actually really struggle to deal with the practicalities of the material world in their day-to-day life. And so if you're constantly seeing different types of beings, and you're seeing all of these energy fields, and seeing people's past lives and all of these different things, it actually makes your day-to-day life much, much more difficult, I think. So unless you really develop the ability to use those skills with a real high level of control and skill, it's actually better not to have a lot of those skills. And so I think if you feel as though you're someone who doesn't have a lot of those visionary capacities, like feel as though that like the way your veil is set up is perfect for you, for the things that you need to achieve, and for the soul's mission that you're trying to live out. Everything is set up perfectly for you. And if you
Yeah.
do need those capacities at some point in the future, like have faith that they will come of their own, in their own time, in their own way.
Yeah, I love that. And so ego, in a sense, is that veil?
So what I like to think is so when you're a child and you've come into the world, you're looking for something to grasp hold of. It's like the question is like always, who am I? And you're the stranger in a strange land. You're starting to like learn language, and you're starting to understand at least what people are saying to you, and you're starting to be able to communicate. But what tends to happen is that you'll have certain experiences, and they will give you some sort of feedback. So you'll do something and your parents will be incredibly proud of you, or people will give you a lot of praise and a lot of validation. And so these decisions we start to make about those things is, okay, obviously that's really important, that thing that I did. Like the fact that I was really funny, or that I was really quiet and well behaved, or that I was, that I helped out, that I was hardworking, whatever those choices that you make along the way, you tend to cling onto those things because you're looking for something to call yourself. You're looking for something to call your own. So I think when you do have positive experiences or even negative experiences, those become the foundational or formative ideas for what you call yourself, like your unique personality.
It's like the character that you play in the drama. We've
Yeah,
talked about the idea of a character.
yeah, exactly. So So obviously when we think about it now and we think that, as a 6-year-old, we got up in front of the family and, we did something really funny and everyone laughed. And then we thought, oh, okay, like this is my strategy to be successful in this game. It's like, I've got to be funny. I've always got to be a clown. And so you make the decision at that point as a 6-year-old that, okay, the way to win in this game is just to be a clown at all times. And like looking at it from our perspective, we're like, okay, that's probably not the best strategy in life. Like just to always be a clown. But you've got to remember, like at that point, you're dealing with such a small sample size of experiences, and you're desperately seeking some sense of, who am I? Like, what am I here for? Like, how does this game work? Like, how do I be successful? Like, how do I, make friends? How do I, get love and, feel warmth and all of those things? And so each of us is this really unusual mixture of all of the experiences we've had and all of the things we've made those experiences mean. And but they're obviously not the same thing. There's like things that happened, and then there's in our childlike brain, we said, "Oh, I know what this means. This means I
Yeah, but
always have to be a
then
joker."
the weird thing is that those decisions we make as children, although we have very little information to base those decisions on, they're really far reaching because they go all the way through our entire life. So that's kind of like a weird thing, that how life is set up, that decisions that we make with very little information around us have such an impact on the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and what you could imagine is that some of those things are perhaps some of our innate qualities expressing themselves. So perhaps we are just innately someone who loves to see people get joy and laugh, and so that is the natural way that we should be expressing ourselves. But also we're going to get it wrong in how important it is to always be a clown. We're going to
Yeah,
overestimate in that moment because it's like those first experiences of getting praise from the world and getting praise from our family are really, really important. And then there's people as well who grow up in circumstances where they never get that. They never get any positive reinforcement from the people around them. They're always made to feel inadequate and they're made to feel less than and they're made to feel incomplete. And so you can end up as an adult being incredibly successful, but being driven by the story that you're completely worthless.
I mean,
And
many successful people have that kind of story about themselves.
yeah, so it's like
That's right.
it's like a real tragedy. It's like the world. We've talked about it before. You can either say, there's only two fundamental stories. There's a tragedy or a tragic comedy. And so some people, the person who's feeling they're worthless, no matter how successful they are, that's a real tragedy to me. And perhaps the person who takes on the character of being the clown, he's doing the tragic comedy. So.
Interesting.
So that's for me is that our ego is the story and the myth. It's almost like a myth we make up about who we are, and it's all of these experiences feed into it. And because that's the only story we've known for a really long time, we believe it's true. We believe it's the only story that could possibly be true because that's the only story that we know. So we overestimate the importance of the story because it is the only story that we knew for the longest period of time. And it's really not until we've made some serious progress in our awareness and our consciousness and expanded and grown in some way that we can actually start to look back and see that so much of what we thought of who we thought we were and the character we thought we were was perhaps decisions made with very poor information, and often those decisions as well are not successful decisions. I mean, you see the amount of people who the way that the character that they've taken on is a wholly unsuccessful character in the world, that they cannot get on well with other people, they cannot get on well in society, and that the character that they've taken on is the limiting factor that is stopping them actually from being successful in life.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, then it's more like, your spiritual maturity, or, more your maturity in general as you grow up, is to find the right balance between all those qualities, those innate qualities that we have, and how much of that we are manifesting at any one time. It's, something that I think this fine-tuning of who we are, that happens through our personal development, like the growth that we
Yeah.
do as human beings. And then we become more and more balanced as life goes on. And so I think the sharp edges of the ego, they become less and less if we grow spiritually. And there's an interesting story by Hazrat Inayat Khan, who was a Sufi master, and he compared the ego to a magic shrub. And he said, like, the ego in the beginning, it's like a very thorny bush. It's got like it's ugly. There's no flowers there. There's hardly any leaves, and just a bunch of thorns. And that's like the very rudimentary quality of the ego. But then when we start to grow spiritually, we start to develop ourselves, we chop down that bush. That's like when we make some progress. We chop down the ego bush, but being a magic bush, it grows back again. But when it grows back, it's a little bit more beautiful than the version before it. So there's a little bit less thorns. There's some little flowers that are peeking up. There's some leaves developing. And again, we make progress. We chop down the ego tree, the ego bush. And again, it grows back. And every time it grows back, it's more beautiful. And so now flowers start to appear, and now fragrance, and some more leaves, and it becomes, every time we chop it down, it becomes more beautiful when it grows back. And so it never really disappears. You can't really make ego disappear. There's always a sense of self, but it's like our growth, our spiritual growth, makes that ego less sharp and more beautiful. And so it's like, to what you were saying before, that some people's egos just are such an obstacle to them functioning well in the world. They're just butting their head all the time, and the sharp edges are constantly getting in the way. And so that's what happens, I think, when you do spiritual practice and spiritual growth, is that your ego becomes much more balanced and well formed and better functioning in the world.
Yeah, I love that idea of the magic shrub. I had not heard that one before, so thank you for sharing that. That's
Sure.
yeah, that's kind of a really good model for perhaps what's going on. And so if we look back from like the early stages of when we're creating the story of our ego and what we're identifying with, we're caught up in this world, and we're almost told that what sort of world we're living in is a world of things. And so you're a thing, I'm a thing, he's a thing, she's a thing. There's things all around us. And so we're the culture around us is giving us a story and a myth as well. So it's not just us making up things. It's also the environment around us that is creating the story of who we are. And so when you're you're coming into the world, and you're feeling alone and afraid, and dealing with all the difficulties, you're trying to find things to grab hold of, to make yourself feel safe and make yourself feel loved, and make things feel as though they make sense in some fashion. And so when you're told that you live in a world of things, and you're one separate thing and everyone else is separate things from you, you're all discrete separate things, you're going to start to develop a way of interacting with the world where you're going to be looking out for yourself. You're going to be like, okay, I need to protect myself. I need to, try and get resources or things that I want. I've got to try and get them for myself. And so, you see that with children, when, they're collecting toys, or they're collecting toy cars, or this or that, they're trying to find joy and happiness from outside of themselves. So they're trying to grab hold of things. And you see that one of the biggest lessons for children when they're young is learning to share, like how to share these things, because they've claimed this thing, like, this is mine. And this is very much the nature of the ego, is this nature of separativity. It's not seeing things as interconnected and continuous. Everything is discrete, separate beings. And you're basically fighting for survival here. And
And
perhaps
that also the ego is claiming those things. So it's I and mine, like everything is possessiveness. That's also part of ego.
Yeah. And so a good parent is always trying to push them a little bit beyond that, like to get to the point where, okay, that's yours, but like you have to learn to share what you have with the people around you, because that's how we make friends. That's how we connect with people, is going beyond that. And so as we grow up, depending on how well we've been parented and how positive or negative the experiences we have are, you see that that's going to be understood to greater or lesser levels. And you only need to look at someone who's not well socialized in the world, and how badly they've got that wrong. Like someone who goes around breaking into houses of other people and taking their things. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, that's someone who hasn't understood and never learned the value of sharing. And they're still in that game of like, okay, I'm some separate, small, finite being, and I've just got to try and get as much as I can. And like, to hell with everyone else. Like, it doesn't, they're not your concern. The only concern that you have is your own, survival. And
Yeah.
so, and you see as human beings exist on such an amazing, vast scale of experiences, from people who act like that to people who are really so um, ready to give up everything they have to help other people. And so you can have these two people, and they're both human beings, and they're both, they're both
I would say
constantly.
they have different ego shrubs,
Yeah.
different ego bushes, different states of development.
Yes, exactly. So I think there is, it makes sense the way the ego develops when you think about the problems it's trying to solve and you think about the environments it finds itself in. So all of those things are going to create a particular ego that you're experiencing the world through today. And so, and like you said, no one is without a sense of self, because obviously we need a sense of self to know how to react properly in certain situations, how to interact with the government. Like, if the government comes to you and says, okay, we want you to pay your taxes, and you're like, well, I don't actually exist. I'm actually continuous with all other consciousness out there in the universe. I mean, the government's probably not at the point where they can, recognize the truth of what you're saying. And, it's just going to get you into trouble. And so knowing how to play the game of the ego, but also knowing that you're not only the ego, that there is something beyond the ego, and that you are actually something beyond that story that you're telling about who you are.
Yeah. What I also find interesting about ego is that it loves the extremes. So at one point, ego likes to be the best. We know the trope of the big ego man.
Yeah.
The man who is, he's on top of the world. He wants to make a lot of money, flashy cars, trophy wives, and then we call that's a huge ego. And so ego loves to be the best, but also ego loves to be the worst. There's also people who love to suffer, and it's like, oh my god, I'm the worst sufferer. I go through so much misery and hardship, and nobody suffers as much as I do. That's actually also a manifestation of ego. So it loves to be special, no matter if it's in the positive or in the negative. It just loves to stand out. Um, why is that? Does ego love to stand out like that?
Yeah, I mean that is a really interesting thing, and like you pointed out, there's the two extremes, and both of them are the wrong place. So, like
Yeah.
being extreme and you're trying to make yourself as small as possible is the wrong way to approach how you should see yourself, but also trying to overinflate your capacities, and this is the quality that you and I have talked about in a previous episode, which was a really good one, was about humility, and so
Yeah.
the
I
idea
thought
of
you were. I wanted to go there as well. That's great.
yeah, so
Humility.
the idea of humility is seeing yourself as you truly are. So not overinflating your capacities, but also not underestimating your capacities. And so it's always like that idea of the Buddha, like we need to find the middle path. And as soon as you find yourself on any extreme, you're probably in the wrong place. And so trying to bring yourself back to the middle path. But I think it's simply that idea of trying to find your own unique specialness. Because when
Yeah.
you find yourself here in this world, and it seems like there's billions of souls here, or there's billions of people here, and how can I stand out in some way? How can I make myself noticed? And so by being the biggest ego, you can get yourself noticed, but also making yourself as small as possible, you can find some make yourself
Yeah.
noticed in that way as well.
Some
So
meaning.
yeah, it's just yeah, it's this wrong wrong conception of um what the game we're playing actually is. And so that's one of the things. If you don't ever get to the point where you start to realize that perhaps the world is not just the law of the jungle, and the biggest and strongest is going to take all the resources, and it's how sharp your teeth are. If you're still playing that game when you're in your 40s and your 50s, it's like, you probably missed some clues along the way that we're trying to say, hey, hello, wake up. Like this, there
This
is
is not the
something.
game. This is not the best game to play.
No, because yeah, as soon as you start to imagine even that perhaps this world is a game that's even, if you take it at one step higher than that, and perhaps say, perhaps it's a game of not taking, but it's a game of giving. Like
Mm,
already you're living in a different universe. As soon as you
yeah,
start to make that step and say, perhaps it's how much I can give to the people around me, the people I love. And, perhaps, then if I do that well, perhaps then I can try and give something to the world around me. And
yeah. I have
that,
to think about the country of Bhutan, who has the gross national happiness as a
yeah,
rating of the people's well-being instead of the gross national product. And that is such a beautiful way to measure well-being and happiness and success of a country. Is I mean, it's of course there's practical objections like how do you measure happiness, but to have that as your baseline to see not how rich people are, how much they produce, but how happy they feel. That is like that's how we measure the success of our country, and that's the same as what we just said. Like not measuring by not playing the economical game or the ego game, but playing and not taking so much, but just by the successful measure is how much can I give to the world.
yeah. And that for me as well, it speaks to the the idea that over time, you should be trying to find higher and higher level games to play. Like you shouldn't be spending your whole life playing the same game. So like, when you start off as a child when your ego is just developing, you're playing small games in the sandpit. You're making castles and you're knocking them over and you're learning. Then at some point you start to learn to share and interact with some other kids. So you start to learn how to play some reciprocal games. And so you start to learn how to make friends and you start to realize that just you collecting Hot Wheels cars is not the whole meaning of life. Like at the time when you're doing that, when you're 2 or 3 or 4 years old, that seems like that's the whole universe. And so it's like this beautiful unfolding of your awareness and consciousness. And I think that's something that should always be happening throughout your life. Like as soon as you feel as though you're still playing the same games in the same way as you were 10 years ago, it's like you've missed some steps along the way. Like something is always like the universe is always trying to call you out to be more than you are. It's trying to pull the greatness, the potential greatness from within you. If you're open to seeing that, if you're open to looking for that, and that's yeah, that's also part of the game. Is like always expanding your consciousness, always expanding your ability to see and be aware. This is actually a good point to bring in now, I think, as well, is that it's almost like we've got two ways of looking at the world, and you could say it's like a spotlight versus a floodlight, and it's almost like using the two different sides of your brain. But if we look at it like at the small human ego and then the large I, the divine ego. It's the human ego is looking through the small spotlight. So it's looking around and it's looking for resources, it's looking for opportunities, it's looking for ways to, make itself greater, to get ahead, to gain more power or influence, whatever it is. So it's never seeing the world in its fullness. It's just seeing that small area that's illuminated by that by the spotlight. But then we've got this other way of looking at the world. And I was thinking about that in my run this morning because I was running along and I was running through this park and I could feel the difference when I was looking through my ego and through my spotlight consciousness. I could see like, the ground, I could see the trunks of all the trees around me. And then at some point, I moved into my floodlight consciousness, like my bigger self, my wider awareness. And suddenly my head was drawn up and I looked around and there was all these amazing trees up there. And I was thinking to myself, wow, how many times do people, or how much time do people spend going through their lives and you're just seeing these small trunks? And like, how often do you actually stop and look and see the entire tree? And as soon as you look up and see the entire tree, you feel your consciousness is changed. It's you're no longer in the small little I, myself, trying to, collect the baubles of the world. Suddenly you look up and you see the majesty and you see the beauty all around you. And it's so much is controlled by how you're looking at the world. And, whether you're in your small self and identified with the smallest part of your being, or how much of the time can you step out of that and step into this floodlight? And what the floodlight does is the light goes everywhere. It illuminates the broadest possible picture of the world. And so learning and understanding that you have that ability at any moment to really focus into like the smallest possible point, but also to be able to step back and like see things in their vastness and
Yeah, and sometimes we need the floodlight and sometimes we need the spotlight. Of course, it depends on the situation.
yeah.
And also, I'm also reminded in my meditation class, very often I ask people to think of a moment when they felt happy, but for no apparent reason, like this spontaneous sense of happiness. And this can happen when you're walking along the street or when you're in nature, and all of a sudden you feel this like everything is perfect. You're looking around and you're all of a sudden you're struck by the beauty of the world around you, and you feel overwhelmed by the sense of real happiness, inner happiness. And this does not have any outer trigger. It's like nobody paid you a compliment. It's not that you received some good news or you made a promotion at work or you bought a new car or some clothes. No, you're just walking there and you're overwhelmed by this sense of happiness. And that is I think that is when that deeper nature comes to the fore, that divine ego comes to the fore. And that is when we really experience the world as it is, behind the veil of Maya. And we see so much beauty and we experience so much peace. And there is this sense of joy and meaning, and everything is perfect. We kind of feel from a very deep sense, everything is as it should be. And those moments are so beautiful, and very often they are the start of a spiritual journey because they disappear again. They're not there permanently. They come and then they go, and we're like, oh, I wish I could hold on to them longer. And then people start to look for the experience again and start maybe practicing meditation or doing a spiritual practice. But I think those experiences, I mean, if I ask people, everybody raises their hands. Like everybody has these experiences. So we have had many times the experience of, the true sense of the world as it is, as it was created by the divine. And yeah, so we have peeked behind the veil of ego, I think, for many of us. And then it's, of course, then it's like, how do we remain there? Or how do we go from there?
Yeah, it reminds me of the beautiful comment by Sri Aurobindo, where he said, "For joy and not for sorrow, the earth was made." And,
Yeah,
and I think when we're stuck in the small self, we're experiencing all the sorrow and suffering. We're experiencing all the hardships. And it's only when we can learn to step back into the larger, the divine I, or the divine ego, or the divine self, then we suddenly see again, oh, it is all joy. This world is made for joy.
yeah,
So what I would say about what you were talking about is, mm, we need to understand that things are not as they seem. And so we've obviously, we started talking about, as a child, we start to get the sense of mine and yours, and we start to try and possess things for ourselves. And so there's some sense of progress and lessons learned, and we evolve in some way. But there's also the ability to see the world in different ways. And it's like changing our focus. And so we tend to think of ourselves as separate beings. We tend to think of ourselves, like I said before, as, especially when you come from the Western culture, where we talk about a material universe and we talk about the material world around you. And so we have this idea of all of these separate, individual things. And so, there's you and there's me, there's your house, there's my house, there's all of these things. But as soon as we change the perspective, we zoom in or we zoom out, we realize that it doesn't really actually work. It only works from this particular point of the human ego. So, like, if we say, okay, you are you are Abhinaba, you're this one concrete thing. Like, if I zoom in a little bit, like, it doesn't even have to be that much, but a little bit, suddenly I'll find that there's, like, trillions of cells and, bacterias like living inside your digestive system. And it's like, hey, I thought you were one thing. And it's like, but who are all these guys? Like, how are they part of this one thing? And you see that I think they say that there's as many cells in you, or there's perhaps more, that are not you inside your body than are you. And so,
yeah,
like, as soon as you start looking on a different level of magnification, you start, hang on a second, I thought I was just with this one separate thing, but it already turns out that I'm made of billions and billions of other things. We go down even smaller, and then we realize that you're just made of all these atoms that are the exact same atoms that are making up everything else. So it's
Yeah.
like, well, how am I different and separate from all of these other things when I'm actually made
Oh,
of the
you
exact
float.
same stuff as everything else? And then, so, this is going to the smaller scale. And it's the same though as if we zoom out, like if we zoom out and look down, on the city of Amsterdam, and we see, there's like several million people, moving around every day. And all of those millions of people are making Amsterdam. Like there's this thing called Amsterdam, and it's Amsterdamming. It's like, that's what it does. Every day it comes
Yeah,
to life, and all these things happen. And so you can zoom in and say, oh no, this is all of these separate things. But I could equally look out and say, no, no, this is just the thing, the being, the entity that I call Amsterdam. This is how it works. All of
yeah,
these things are rushing around. They're like, the blood
yeah.
vessels. They're carrying energy, and they're making the whole thing happen. And you could do this on many different levels. So
Could you do it on a country level too? Or
totally,
on the
you could do it on a
continent?
country level. You could do it on a planetary level. So
Yeah,
there's this really great way that the great philosopher and thinker Alan Watts likes to talk about things. He says, an apple tree apples. That's what it does. It makes
yeah.
apples. And then he says, planet Earth, it peoples. That's what it does. If you'd come to Earth like 3 billion years ago, and life had just started, and you kind of thought, well, even before life started, you just would come here and you say, oh, well, it's just this big rocky ball. Like there's nothing going on here. Like it's totally uninteresting. And then if you came back 3.7 billion years later, and then you suddenly saw all of these people on the planet, you're like, wow,
Yeah,
this planet is doing what it does. It's peopling. All of these
yeah,
people pop out of it. It's like these. And what's really cool about that is then, if this planet, all these rocks on the planet gave birth to all of this life. It's like, oh, these rocks, they mustn't be completely unconscious. There must be some consciousness and awareness in them to allow, because, how could you have all this life come from something that's completely lifeless? Like there has to be some potentiality for life already existing in that system. And so yeah, you could say that the rocks, like we've talked about before, are like, perhaps the lowest, or minerals are perhaps the lowest level of consciousness. But there is consciousness there. There is some potential consciousness
yeah.
existing within them. And we're just at the other extreme. Like now we've gone to, we're all zany colors and moving around and thinking different things and making musicals and doing an infinite variety of different things.
Yeah, and I think when you said about, when you zoom out to you can kind of see a unit there, like a city, like a person. And I
Yeah.
think what is that unit, what really defines the unit for me would be the soul. So the divine
Mm,
essence. So that is like the real virginness of the being I see before me is the soul
yeah.
that is inside you, that connects you back to the divine. And I think a city also can have a soul. I mean, I'm absolutely positive it has one, and a
Yeah.
country has a soul. And so all these things that we understand as units, whether it's a city or a country or a continent or a
Or a
planet,
planet. Yeah.
yeah, they will have a soul. And I mean, the spiritual masters have said that those entities do have souls. I've heard Sri Chinmoy many times speak about how he sometimes talked to the soul of a country when he came somewhere, or he contacted the soul of his particular location, and he would write songs about countries and about their souls and about the souls of even cities or places or even hotels that he visited sometimes. So for a spiritual master, that becomes real. And so I think that is why we consider these things as units. But then if we zoom in to the minutiae of that particular unit, it will have all kinds of things going on inside it as well.
Mm.
But I think the essence would be then the soul quality of the object or thing.
I would love to meet the soul of Amsterdam. I just imagine the
Ah,
soul of Amsterdam is full of such beauty and refinement, and I would imagine it would speak in the language of the Concertgebouw orchestra. Like this is the
yeah,
soul of Amsterdam speaking.
for
And then if
sure.
you and then the Rijksmuseum, is like, the soul of Amsterdam is showing off
And
its greatness.
it's riding a bike, probably.
Yeah, so I mean, and what you would, for things to really make sense, you want things to exist on all levels. So, like, if you have a soul, if all of these molecules and atoms have clumped together and become you, that makes sense that, okay, then, you are a soul holding together all of those things. And then that should happen on the next level up, though. It should happen in your town, in your city, in your country, that there should be some force of spiritual consciousness that's holding that thing in a particular form. And I know Rudolf Steiner, who was one of the great visionaries of the last couple of 100 years. This is how he actually talked about people. He would see them. He would say, the real you, the real Abhinaba, is invisible. But how I know he exists, he's an invisible field of energy that is holding together all of the cells. Those are the things we can see, all of the building blocks, all the materials. But the
Yeah.
real you is this field of energy that's holding them all together. And that makes sense, that when the soul leaves the body, suddenly the body doesn't feel like the person anymore. Like if you're there
Yeah.
with the body of a departed person, you don't look at it and say, "Oh, yes, that's still Abhinaba." You're like, no,
Yeah.
that's just a clump of souls, of
Yeah.
cell. That's just the material building block. But
Yeah, and then it starts to decompose after that, it starts to disintegrate and disappear altogether.
yeah, and so it returns back to just building blocks of
Yeah,
matter. But
yeah,
there's something really interesting and cool to imagine that and see that that's how everyone's being held together. The spirit or the soul is not, some anomaly or some, weird, fluke of, creation. It is actually the energy that's holding the whole being together.
yeah,
That
it's the
that
essence of
that's the real
creation.
essence of the whole thing. So.
Wonderful. Did you wanna talk more about ego, or where did you wanna go now?
Well, I think like talking a little bit about how we could start to transform and transcend that limited sense of
Yes,
self, because
yes, great.
that is a real problem when we keep falling back into that trap, because
Yeah,
it's like a program, and it's like all of those things. I think like each time you think you've had a brilliant breakthrough in how to live in the world, it's like you record that as a program somewhere in your consciousness. So like if we go back to the child who at 5 years old, gets up in front of the family and fooling around, and everyone laughs, and they think, right, that is an important program that I need to like I need to record that, and I need to have that available to play that again and again and again. And then you'll over time stack up a whole bunch more programs on top of that. So, you
yes.
might decide that, being snarky is a great strategy in life, or, being incredibly kind and self-giving, or,
Yeah, or very
whatever.
competitive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you could in a huge number of moments you could learn a particular lesson, and you're like, right, okay, this is an important thing that I want to keep. I want to keep access to being able to do this, because I think this is like a strategy that's going to work well in life. And so you've got all these programs that you've recorded, and that at certain points when there's a certain trigger, they will just automatically start playing. So it's like if you start feeling, nervous or shy, maybe that's when you think, oh, immediately you start playing the clown again. This program that you've been running since you're 6 years old. If you're feeling a little bit awkward and shy, you immediately go into being the clown and doing silly things and trying to make people laugh, or whichever program it is that fits that particular situation. And so you start to realize that so many of your responses to situations, you're not actually choosing to act in that way. You're simply playing an old program that you've been playing for years and years and years. And in some ways, it's almost like a mechanical process. Like if you really start to pay attention, when you feel the beginning of the program, it's like, all these levers and knobs and cogs and gears start whirring. And then you start saying the things and acting in the way, and it's almost like you've got no real control of it. You've become like
Yeah,
sort of, some sort of robotic automaton.
puppet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so it's not really you reacting to that situation. And often as well, how you're made to feel in a situation can cause you to revert back to, to being a child or being a young person or being, a previous version of yourself. And it will cause these responses that are actually no longer aligned with who you are in the moment anymore. But you've
yeah,
still got all these programs. And so becoming aware of those through your spiritual practice is an incredibly powerful process, because You start to through developing your own awareness. So it's like when you switch from like being stuck in the spotlight, being stuck in the very small focused um because as well, for people who didn't hear last week's amazing episode about Maya, one of the meanings of the word Maya or illusion is to measure. So when we start breaking down the world into smaller and smaller chunks of information, we're measuring, 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 but we're getting further and further away from the truth, and we're getting more and more into this illusion of reality. And we talked about the matrix, and I actually wanted to mention that I think the proper meaning of the word matrix is a grid. So a
Yeah.
matrix is when we have a grid of, horizontal and vertical lines. And so when we start experiencing the world as though, it's these discrete bite-sized pieces of information, which it's not. Like everything is actually connected and continuous. And then we get further and further away from what is real, and we start to get more and more lost in our own self-created illusion of reality. Um, but so what we're doing when we're meditating is we're experiencing reality without any filtering. So instead of being there with our small spotlight, like focused, on and trying to see, every discrete thing, yours, mine, separativity, we're trying to be there, and we're trying to expand our consciousness into this expansive space where everything feels interconnected. And in that space, we can really just sit there and be aware, and we can allow whatever happens to happen, and we can pay attention to it. And so that's when you actually start to step back and you become the watcher. So instead of being caught by every single thought you're having, you can stand back and you can see the thoughts appearing in your mind. Or you can see your brain producing thoughts. And that's actually another thing that's it's really worth noting as well, is trying to get to the point where mind or consciousness and your brain start to become two different things. And so when we can learn to step back through our spiritual practices, so through our meditation, we're sitting there, we're connected, we're becoming one with everything, and we're seeing the brain producing thoughts that are appearing in our mind. And we know if we give them attention, that they will grow and they will metastasize and they will spread, and other thoughts will come from that one thought and will become this whole train of thoughts. But we also start to become aware that we can simply allow them to pop into existence, but without our conscious awareness and attention, they will simply disappear again. Like they're like clouds passing by, and they will be on their way. And so this is a great space to start to really know ourselves, because if we can be in that space and then go into our day-to-day lives, we'll see moments where these old ways of being will start to, the gears and cranks will have an interaction with someone, and our this particular program that's trying to defend us in situations of conflict, it will start to whir into gear, and we'll start to prepare some slings and arrows to attack the other person back. And it's actually a couple of friends of mine who've been practicing the spiritual life for many years. I was talking with them some years ago, and they'd known each other for many years, and they'd realized at some point that their relationship, they were calling it like, it was like two dinosaurs. It was like, I'd whack you with my tail, and so you'd try and whack me twice as hard. And so they realized at some point that this old dinosaur way of being, and that's almost what it's like. It's like coming from the old reptilian part of your consciousness. It's like if
Yeah.
someone hurts you, you've got to hurt them twice as hard to
Eye
to
for
teach
an
them a
eye, tooth
lesson.
for a tooth.
And
Yeah.
so it was so great when he was telling me, I realized we were like two old dinosaurs just whacking each other. And then I said, let's stop whacking each other. Let's start trying to work together. And their relationship and their work life became infinitely better just from that awareness that they were playing old programs that were no longer serving them in this, that they were no longer actually matching who they were. Like these two
Yeah.
people had grown and developed, but you've still got all this old programming. So if you still allow all of
Yeah.
those old ways of
I
being
mean,
to
I
come
I
out.
I saw I saw the same happening in my parents. My parents, divorced when they after 33 years of marriage. But I mean, it was really good that they did, because, for many years, there was all these patterns that they developed where, one would say something and it would trigger something in the other, and they would respond. And, me and my sister, we could already see the whole thing, tumbling down when something was triggered, and, a kind of a fight ensued. And, there was no harmony really in the relationship. So it was really, and I mean, my mother was actually willing to look at those things and to really work through it, but I think my dad was not really up for that. And so if both parties are not willing to be aware of it and to look at the patterns, then there's really nothing you can do, because one party will always, follow the programs and starts triggering these negative reactions. And so, yeah, in their case, the best thing I think was for their marriage to end, and they now have a different partner, and they're happy in their new relationships. And so, but yeah, that's so important to become aware of the patterns that we created probably in our childhood. These are very old patterns, and so they have some momentum behind them. And so the only way to stop them is not through our mental processes, but like you said, to observe them in silent meditation. And then when you observe them, they kind of like start to get loose from the ground, and there's some space underneath them almost. And then this space underneath is where you can create new grooves, new patterns that are actually helping us, that are wholesome, that are nurturing us, that are healthy thought patterns, healthy habits, healthy behavioral patterns. And yeah, it's like a needle in the groove, when you think these patterns, it can be a thought process that is very negative, like I'm not good enough, I will never be successful in life, I'm just a failure. And it's like this old record that you play. And so in the old records, you have the needle, you put the needle on the groove, and it just starts playing this music. It just sets into the groove. But then, you need to make a new record, and this brand new record, the grooves are still very thin. They're not really as deep as the old record. And so that's what meditation does. It creates these new grooves in your mind. And so the needle of your mind can fall into the new grooves, which have these very positive thought patterns. I am a child of the divine. I am part of infinity. I am the soul. I can be successful. And all these positive thought patterns that can be there. But in the beginning, of course, the grooves are not as deeply cut. And so very often the needle will slip back to the old grooves. But when you practice enough, that's why the repetition is so important.
Mm.
It's like erosion. The water can cut out rock. If it just keeps falling on the rock, it will cut out the whole rock. And so the same with our meditation practice. It's like this water falling down into the rocks, and it's creating the new grooves. And if we've practiced enough time, at some point, the needle will not fall back into the old grooves. It will keep spinning in the new grooves. And then we get so used to this music, it's like we can toss the old records away. We don't need those old thought patterns anymore. And that's the transformation that happens when we create the new patterns, the new grooves. And at some point, we can just, get rid of the old. It's not serving us anymore, the old music. And we can toss it out.
Can instead of tossing out the old records, could we sell them at King's Day, or a garage sale, a yard
There
sale
will
in
always
America?
there will always be somebody who will give you gladly 1 or 2 euros for them on the King's Day in Amsterdam.
For the old negative, records with the really deep
Yeah, but
grooves in them.
I think they will not be from the '70s though. That's where all the really groovy stuff comes from, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
So, we've talked about, this kind of idea, many times over, the last year. But I always like to think of how you would choose to approach your day-to-day life if you could have a complete blank slate. If, like, you could get rid of all of the grooves, if you could get rid of all of your records, and then every day you were able to actually choose. Like, you woke up and you felt like, you were just newly born, and you had no preconceived memories, and you had no ideas about how you should be in the world, and you had no attachment to the
It's
ego
like
of
you were a baby again. You're
yeah.
like a 0-year-old again.
But yeah, with your full awareness you have now, because I always like to think about that just as an idea is, if I could choose how I would appear in the world and how I would interact with all of the people around me and the world around me, how would I set that up? What would that look like? And if it doesn't look like, if the way you see yourself, if you could choose, if there's some, discrepancy between how you actually act in the world versus how you would love to see yourself acting in the world, this is a great exercise, because you can start to see the areas like, okay, perhaps I'm really anxious, and, in social situations, or, about a whole bunch of things, I get really anxious. if I was going to choose how I would show up in my life, I probably wouldn't choose, oh, yeah, every day I wake up in the morning and be completely anxious about how everything's going to go. And I'm going to be so worried about, what is going to happen. It's like, I probably wouldn't, like, I only choose those because I think that's who I am. Like, if I've told myself enough times and I've identified myself with the story that's how I keep myself safe in the world, is by being anxious and worrying. If I can really look at that and say, it's not being successful, it's not actually helping me in my life anymore. Like, perhaps when you're a child, and then this often happens for people who grow up in situations where there's a lot of chaos or violence and dysfunction, that they have to become hyper aware. They have to become hyper aware of any danger, of the potential for things going wrong, because in their situation they're weak and powerless. And so they have to be hyper aware at all times of all the things that could possibly go wrong. But like, now, if I'm, a 45-year-old man, and I still get up every morning and feel completely anxious about, what could possibly go wrong, that's probably not the right strategy anymore, because now I've got enough agency and power in my life that I can actually avoid most of those things. Like, most of those things aren't going to come and wipe me out like they would have if I was a 5-year-old. And so, by being able to see where there's the discrepancies between who you actually feel that you would like to grow into and who you see yourself, when you're seeing yourself in the best possible light, like, that's who you want to try and grow into. You don't want to just fall back into, well, I've always been cantankerous and I've always been anxious, or I've always been cranky and disagreeable. Like, that's probably just an old groove that you keep getting stuck into, but it's not a groove that you would choose to play. If you're gonna
Yeah.
choose to play a track on the record of your mind, putting on that good, oh, let's put on that good old anxiety track, that old thing. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So, just
Exactly.
seeing the ludicrousness of constantly choosing to go back to patterns that are no
Yeah.
longer necessary to keep you safe, but they're also taking away the quality of your life now. Like, they're making you feel anxious and stressed and sad and worried and like all of these things. So it's like being wise, and part of it as well, though, is valuing yourself enough, and valuing yourself, like seeing the good in you, and being willing to, like, there's a good idea that we're often so much more kind and compassionate and loving to everyone else around us than we are to ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
we see other people make mistakes, and we're really willing and ready to forgive them and to accept, that they're doing the best they can. When we make the same mistake, we can often be so ruthless and cruel to ourselves, which just seems crazy because we have to live with ourselves, and yet we're being, our own harshest critic. So it's
Yeah.
learning to let go of and it's almost like you were saying, it's like we can either tell ourselves we're the world's greatest person, or we can tell ourselves we're the world's worst person. And in both cases, we're going to convince ourselves to some degree that we're right, but neither of those approaches is the right way. It's really trying to see, like, who am I? Who am I being in the world today? And like, how could I be better? Like, because who do I really see myself as? Do I really see myself as someone, who's full of worries and stress and anxieties? Or do I really see my highest potentiality as actually being, a divine being here, having human experiences, but being unperturbed by them, being able to go through life and being able to smile in the face of the tragedies, and seeing the comedy in the whole thing, and being able to, make light and make merry in this world.
Yeah, wonderful. That's great. I have some strategies also to,
Good.
let's say, overcome or transform ego. I thought about those, and there's some of them are based also on Sri Chinmoy's writings.
Yeah.
And so one of them is the idea of what Sri Chinmoy called self-giving. And so, the ego wants to keep things often to itself, right? It's very self-centered. And so very often when we live from the ego, we are afraid to kind of give ourselves away or to give our knowledge or share what we have. So one way to really overcome or transcend the ego is to give as much as you can of yourself, give what you have and give what you are to those around you. Like, give your goodwill when you speak with other people, like your sincere goodwill to others, your affection, your concern for others, your wisdom or your knowledge that you have. And the more you give, the more you connect with other people. And that's one way to overcome or transcend, I feel, ego. Because ego, of course, also is like isolating us. It's separating us from the rest of the world. And also nowadays we live in a world where, we have the traditional communities have kind of faded away. Church and family, and in some respects, school or clubs that we in the old days people used to flock to. They've kind of disappeared a little bit or eroded, and so we need to connect again to other people in order to feel this sense of community. And one way to do that is through self-giving. And that's really a practice. So this is something you can practice every day of your life. It doesn't have, you don't have to sit in front of your shrine. You can do this when you go through your day, and just whenever you deal with somebody, to really give them your full attention, your goodwill, your awareness, and share what you have and what you are with the other person. And that's definitely one way of transcending ego and to feel oneness. Because ultimately, I think the antidote to ego is oneness. We had a oneness episode a couple of months ago, and that is very closely connected, of course, with transcending ego. Because ultimately, the reality we are looking for, the spiritual divine reality, is based on oneness. It's not a oneness of the material nature, but it's the oneness of consciousness. And when we are in the heart and when we are deeply immersed in our spiritual heart, we can feel this sense of oneness. And we can also get there through self-giving. And so self-giving definitely expands ourself, and makes us more aware of our shared reality of oneness.
Yeah, and that self-giving as well is creating the reality around us. So there's a great saying that be the change you want to see in the world. So if you
Yeah,
want
it's
the
good.
world to be more joyful and self-giving and connecting, you have to do something about that. Like, you can't rely on other people to create that reality for you. And I actually had a great interaction in the last week. I often go to there's some a pool complex here in Christchurch, out by the beach. It's got many different pools of different temperatures, and it's got a cold plunge, and it's got saunas. And so I really love to go there 2 or 3 times a week and do the cold plunge. And there's a new staff member who worked who started working there a few weeks ago, and he's a Chinese gentleman. And as soon as I saw him, I really noticed his hair, because he had a very unusual haircut for a Chinese person. Like, most Chinese people will often have a particular style, like maybe they'll part their hair in the middle. And his hair, he did it almost like Thomas Shelby from Peaky Blinders, which is this very iconic haircut where you kind of brush your hair forward and have it shaved on the sides. So I'd never seen a Chinese gentleman with this type of haircut before. And like, I just paid attention to him over the first few weeks he was working there. And last week I decided I was going to go talk to him. And I came up to him and said, excuse me, I just really want to say, I really deeply appreciate the amount of effort and care and concern you put into your hairstyling. I said, like, every time I see it, it's like so sharp and so clean and so crisp. And he said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You cannot believe how meaningful, how much that means to me. Thank you so much. He said to me, there's two things I really value above everything in the world, and that's hair and skin. He said, like, because as soon as you let those things go, they never come back. They never come back to how they were before. So he said, I spent a lot of money on my hair and on my skin. And I said, yeah, actually, your skin looks amazing. Like, I really, honestly, I couldn't tell you if he was 25 or 55. Like, he could
Wow.
be any point between those two ages. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But just seeing it, like, it's like when you go into the world, you see what other people value. Like, they're constantly telling you
Oh, yeah.
what's important to them. And it
Yeah.
might be by the way they dress, or the activities they do, or how they style themselves, or the topics they like to talk about. And if you actually pay attention to the people around you, and you acknowledge what they're offering to the world, like, because he was making the world more beautiful, more crisp, more clean cut, more stylish. And so by me pointing it out, it gave him so much joy. It really gave him, like, the joy he had on his face. And even when I was going, he was like, oh my God, thank you so much. Oh my God, thank you so much. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now every time I see him, we have this wonderful bond, because he sees me and I say, hello, friend. He says, hello, hello. And so It's like it takes such a small amount of effort just to pay attention to the people around you and say, "Hey, I love the way you're bringing this to the world, or you're offering that, you're doing this thing, and everyone has something unique they're bringing to the world, and just by encouraging other people, it really creates such an amazing feeling of well-being and happiness and joy."
I love that. That's a beautiful example of self-giving. Really nice. I have another strategy which is connected to when other people do something good, that you identify with their joy. And that's
Mm,
another way to transcend ego. Many times, like when our friends accomplish something great or they have some success in their lives, funnily enough, the ego also always makes us feel a little jealous. There's this little subtle sting that comes from, why we almost wish that they would fail. If we're really sincere, jealousy is like this horrible kind of like, we call it the green-eyed monster, for a reason. That is this little monster that wants other people to fail in life. Even our friends and our dear ones and our close ones. And so that is really ego based. So that's really like the ugly face of ego. And so if you try to practice to be genuinely happy in other people's happiness or in other people's success, then you can really transcend ego in that way. And so whenever somebody does something good, you can feel that you yourself have done it. That is something that Sri Chinmoy wrote about. That he said, you have to feel that you yourself did that. And he said, you're not actually fooling yourself, because ultimately, you are that other person. And ultimately, we do share the same divine reality. And so if we identify with the highest in ourselves, it's the same as the highest in the other person. We all have the same divine source. And so you can say, it's my inspiration or my aspiration that was responsible, or my goodwill that was responsible for that person achieving that success in their life. And I claim it as my own. And that is something that Sri Chinmoy very often talked about, to claim something as your own. So even the success of other people or the good things others have done, claim it as your own on the strength of your oneness with the other people. That's also a very powerful strategy to overcome ego. And it's not easy. And the Buddhists have a whole separate meditation called metta meditation, where you meditate on other people's joy, or let's say you consciously try to wish well on other people, even people
yeah.
that you don't know, like the people at the cash register of your local supermarket. You try to really wish them well, and wish them joy, and then even extend that to your friends, and then ultimately even to your enemies, to wish them well. And so, yeah, that's definitely also something that you can practice every day of your life, because we're coming into situations like that all the time when we experience these things. And so, these are great things we can practice in our day-to-day life, I think, to transcend ego.
Yeah, and I definitely think that last point you made is one of the best strategies, because as soon as you can start to expand yourself from like the small little I, trying to collect up all the toy cars in your corner of the room, and you start realizing like that every time someone else does something good, achieves something good, if you can celebrate that as though you yourself did it, suddenly your potential for happiness and joy, it becomes almost infinite. Whereas if you're only going to allow yourself to be happy when you yourself, the small I, gets another toy car, that it's a very small, limited potential that you can have for happiness and joy. And like I've been thinking about this recently. I was talking with some people about what is the right time scale to focus on for human beings flourishing, for the flourishing of life on Earth, let's say. And like if you're looking in over 1 year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, it seems to be the wrong type of measure, because life's been going for 3.7 billion years. So 10 years, it's like it's not even a second. And so trying to zoom out a little bit and say, hey, like I'm not too concerned about the comings and goings and the ups and downs, in this 6 month or 1 year or 2 years or 5 year period. It's like I want to see human beings or just life in general flourishing on Earth in 1,000 years and in 5,000 years and in 10,000 years. And so when you start changing like the time scale that you're looking to see progress in, it's like if you try and watch the markets, like the markets are just constantly in the short term, they're so random. It's like up and down and up and down and up and down. It's really hard to get any sense of like a true signal of what's actually happening. But if you stand back and look over 50 years, you see, oh, okay, things are trending in a good direction. And it's the same when we talked about, are we living in the best times ever? If you're looking at it like this particular week or this particular 6 months period, you could probably find a whole bunch of reasons why you could say, well, this obviously can't be the best times ever because like there's this conflict here and there's this problem here. But as soon as you start to like zoom out and see things over 50 years and 100 years and 200 years, you start to see this beautiful trajectory of progress and things moving in a really positive direction. So that's kind of the position I take now, is that if I can see that over the last 20 or 30 years that humanity and life on Earth has made progress, like that to me is what I'm looking at, like that. And I can see that so clearly. I can see that from my own childhood and my teenage years, how far we've come in terms of consciousness and how far we've come in terms of understanding of other people and acceptance and all of these really beautiful qualities that I've seen in my own lifetime start to blossom and flourish. And so, and
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're making this podcast is testimony to that.
yeah, yeah. So I think what you said is exactly right. Like zoom out a little bit and see yourself as not just you, not just your family, but start to feel like you're part of humankind. And that humankind, that's what you want to see be successful. Like if you have got some ups and downs in your life, you've got to deal with those yourself. But you want to see the progress that humanity is making, and
Yeah, you
humanity
wanna
is
think of
making.
humanity. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, well, humanity's making tremendous progress. Like if you get out there and go around and see what's going on in the world, you'll be amazed. With
Exactly. Yeah, it's like feeling that it's a team. Your
yeah,
humanity is your team, and
yeah.
when you think of it in terms of sports, it's like you're supporting the team called mankind, and we're all part of that team, and so when the team does well, we do well, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So
We
that's
could even
that's
go
a great
further and
way.
we could say we're team Earthlings. Like we're all
Oh, yeah.
Earthlings here. We were all born out of Mother Earth. And so this is our home. So we want to see this planet thrive and we just want to see this planet be successful. And all of the life here, we want to see it thrive and find balance and find harmony and be able to express its unique role in the cosmic drama.
Beautiful. Now, one more strategy I wanted to talk about is to offer gratitude. Sri Chinmoy said the fastest way to conquer ego is every morning for 5 minutes offer gratitude to God. So
Mm.
that is one strategy that seems very simple, but it's deceptively simple because gratitude is actually one of the most difficult qualities to develop. And it's if you take divine qualities as something that you can buy in a shop, it's like gratitude would be the most expensive one. But I think the reason, or one of the reasons we talked about, is that gratitude develops the humility. One of the things that comes out of gratitude is Sri Chinmoy calls it the flower of humility. And I think that is the best antidote to ego, right? Because if you're humble, you know exactly, your place in the world. You're not overestimating your life. You're not underestimating your life. You're judging your life exactly as it is, and you really calibrate it exactly to where you are on your spiritual journey, on your journey through life. And you don't think of yourself too highly, and you don't think of yourself too lowly as well. And so I think in that way you overcome the sharp edges of ego, these extremes of wanting to be on top of the world or wanting to be the worst sufferer. And so, yeah, gratitude is a very powerful strategy also of overcoming ego.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree on gratitude. And I think we haven't actually done a full episode yet on gratitude, have we?
Yeah, we need to do that. That's a really
So
great.
so that will be one coming to you at some point in the future. So that's one to
Yes,
look out for.
exactly. And so I'm seeing that we are approaching our 1.5 hours of podcasting time. Vajan, did you have anything else to add to what we discussed?
I think we've covered everything I wanted to talk about. So we talked about where the ego comes from and perhaps how the ego builds itself up and constructs itself. And then we've talked a little bit about how we can start to become aware of the way that the ego operates, and we can zoom out. We can use our floodlight consciousness, or we can use our spotlight consciousness, and we can start to use some strategies to create a more well integrated version of ourselves. Because we don't want to destroy the ego per se, but we want to integrate it into our being so it's actually a positive in our life. It's something that is actually is working towards the same goals as the divine part of our being, the highest part of our being.
Exactly.
So
It's like this child that we want to socialize and raise so it
yeah.
becomes a really useful servant.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of good things, a lot of good points we covered, and so some things for people to think about and take away, and perhaps bring into their own practice, so they can
Lovely.
begin to become aware of those old programs that start to crank out some sort of behaviors.
The old records, you know,
Yeah,
the old records, like
those old
those old
records.
jazz records from the 40s and 50s. You know,
Ah,
throw them out. You don't
time
want to
for some
listen to
new
them.
records, isn't it?
Yeah. So anyway, people, thank you so much for joining us this far. And well, if you like our podcast, consider subscribing, tell a friend, or leave a comment. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.